Hey, welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Ham Radio Dude. In this episode, we're going to go over the physical features of the Retevis RT-85. It's a new radio from Retevis that is in the competitive market with the Baofeng UV5Rs as far as price and features go. While we go through the features of this radio, I'm also going to show you how to program this radio via the front panel display and maybe make a couple opinions on what I think about certain things on this radio. And before I jump into part 3 of the programming of this radio and going through the whole actual hardware of this radio, I do want to mention in the last episode, I said that if you use the programming software and you programmed in NOAA weather radio, it would transmit on the radio if you keyed up. And that is only partially true. User Radio Rescue, he let me know that, hey, if you leave the transmit frequency blank, and then you program it, it won't transmit. And I did confirm that that is the case. So I did leave the frequency blank for the transmit, and it gave me some kind of error. I still uploaded the code plug to my radio anyway, and lo and behold, even though it's on 162.500, there's a green light here, I cannot transmit. So thank you so much for that tip. This is the RT85, and if you did not program this via the computer, or you didn't catch the end of my last episode, when you turn on your radio for the first time, you might see something here that shows your memory channels, and you might be wondering, well, how do I get to VFO mode? Because there's no VFO button like, say, on a Baofeng. Well, typically you would tap the pound key, but if this is your first time in the radio, tapping the pound key is probably going to do nothing, or maybe bring you into FM mode. So what do you have to do here to get this thing to actually unlock VFO mode? Well, turn your radio off just like I did here, and then hold down 1 and 7. And while you're holding down 1 and 7, turn the radio on. And while you do that,
Have any questions or comments?
you should hear when you turn it on the 7. And then if you go ahead and hit AB, and then if you tap the pound key, you should be able to go between VFO mode and memory mode. So that's very important. Otherwise, you won't be able to manually put in frequencies yourself, and it would be kind of silly. Some people are saying that 1 and 7 with the power on doesn't actually work to enable VFO mode or unlock VFO mode. And so if that is the case, do it again, hold down 1 and 7 and turn the power on. And then when it gets to this screen here where it shows 07, just type in another number and it completes the process essentially. And then you should be able to switch between VFO mode and memory mode. I did mention you can go between VFO mode and memory mode by tapping the pound key, but what if you want to go into that FM radio that we talked about in the last episode? Hold down the pound key, and after you hold down the pound key, it goes into radio, and as you'll see, there's a VFO mode in radio too. I could type in 105.500, for example. Whoops. And anytime I maybe hit another character or I want to like stop something, this is like an escape button. The AB button is like an escape button. So anyway, you could type in the frequencies in the radio VFO mode, as I call it. But also, we programmed some memories in the radio mode as well. And so now that you're in radio mode, if you tap the pound key again, you can go to your memory channels and you can go up or down and so forth. So you could actually type in on the panel to something like 22 if that was a number, or 0 to go to that memory channel. So keep all that in mind, but you can now tap in between VFO mode of the radio, FM radio, or memory mode. Now, if you want to get back, just hold down the pound key again, and here you are in VFO mode, or now memory mode. And now that we got the radio unlocked for VFO mode, I think it's important that we should probably go over some of the nomenclature of this actual radio, so you're aware of some of the things I'm talking about as well. On the top, it's pretty standard. You have an antenna, but you have a knob, and the knob controls turning on and off the power, as well as your volume control. So it's pretty simple there. But you also have an LED indicating whether or not you're transmitting or receiving. When it's green, you're receiving information or receiving a signal. And when it's red, means you're transmitting. You also have a LED light for a flashlight. And to activate that flashlight, you use the side button that's on the top left. The top left will activate the flashlight if you tap it once, and if you tap it twice, it'll turn it off. You have your push to talk button, which obviously allows you to transmit, and then on the bottom you have a squelch brake button.
40%.
The squelch brake button will allow you, when there's no traffic, to kind of basically listen into the noise that you typically wouldn't want to hear. An example of a squelch break would be like this. Right now I hear nothing, and if I hit that button, I'm now basically unlocking the squelch so I could hear what might be in the static. And I don't need to go over all the details because in part 1 I kind of went through that already. But I do want to mention your display here, LCD display, and your keypad. On the keypad you have this F button, which is a function button, but I'll call it the menu button quite often. And then you'll see the A/B button, which is basically a button that works as going between the A band and the B band. But it also works as an escape button, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. Otherwise, you have your standard keypad here. If I want to go into the menu, I can just tap the function or the menu button. And as you can see, it says menu. And now I can go up and down to all 37 different options, but that could be kind of a pain. So if you knew what option you wanted to access, you could actually manually type it in here. For example, 5 puts me in squelch. 25 puts me in some encoding options. And we're going to go to channel 1 here, or option 1, if you will, which is scan. And now if I tap function again when it's selected on scan, you'll see that I have an arrow here which shows that I'm scanning. So this is in scan mode enabled, and that's great. You could tell I'm receiving something right now because there is a green LED indicator. And if I wanted to skip that channel, I would just go ahead and hit the up arrow and it would start scanning again. I should mention that as of recording this video, I have found no way to actually skip a channel permanently. So if you have something in the scan list that you programmed on the computer, you can't just skip it on the fly, which is kind of a pain. But if that changes, I'll just go ahead and modify this thing and you'll never know I actually made this little rave or rant. Again, it's picking up radio signals at the moment. So if you wanted to turn off the scan, all you'd have to do now is hit either A, B, or F, and it turns that off. Back into the menu function, and we hit the up arrows. There's a couple more options I want to talk about. I discussed Vox level in my last episode, and basically, if you don't know what Vox is, it allows you to talk into the microphone without holding down the push to talk. And if it detects a certain level of microphone sensitivity, it'll enable transmit. So again, menu, Vox, and if I wanted to change that sensitivity level, I would tap the function button and it would go down the tree to 6, and then I can go 5, 4, 3. And then when I decide that I want to actually save it, I tap function. I'll show you what happens though if I tap escape. If I tap escape right here, it actually changes the Vox level back to whatever it was, so it doesn't save the changes. So again, function, 6, function, for example. And that doesn't actually enable anything. If you want to enable Vox, you have to go to option 13. There we go. Option 13, which is Vox switch, and then you could set it off or on if you choose to. Again, function on function, or function off function. And if we go back to option now 4, we'll see that you could set your power levels on the radio as well. I did mention in the episode that there is a low power and a high power setting, which is 1 watt or 5 watts. And we're going to have to go experiment with this a little bit later because there's also a middle range setting, which I'm assuming is probably 2.5 watts. But you could set your power levels here and then you could tap enter. You could actually set the levels of your squelch and whether you're in dual standby mode or dual wait mode. You could turn your LED on or off. And so this will be the screen. So if I even auto. And so if I were to set this to auto, basically in just a couple of seconds, you'll see the backlight will turn off. While editing this video, I recognized that I didn't actually let the video complete through, so you couldn't see the backlight turn off. But in the auto feature, the backlight turns off after just a few seconds. And if you hit a button, it'll turn back on. For the sake of this video, though, I did leave the backlight on. It makes it easier for the viewer, you, to be able to see what's going on the screen. Now that we're familiar with at least how the menu works, we're going to go ahead and we're going to program a frequency into the memory mode of this radio. And the best way to do that is the other day we did N9AGP VHF repeater when we programmed everything with the software. We're going to use that same repeater, and I have the information up here on the screen. But what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to tap that pound key so we go into VFO mode. Here we are in VFO mode, and 145.330 is the receive frequency, so we're just going to type that in here, 145.330. As you'll see, I have it inputted in here. And now we're going to enter the menu, And what we're going to do is we're going to program the transmitting frequency, which is 144.730, because this repeater transmits on a different frequency than it receives on. To do that, we're going to go ahead and hit menu, and we're going to type in 22, and we're going to get to the offset option. Now, if you look at the downlink, 145.330 minus 144.730, you're going to get your offset, which is 0.6000. So this is actually set correctly, but if it wasn't, you would have to go all the way up and down. You can't just type in something like 105.5. You actually have to go through this whole menu. And another thing I'm going to mention about this too, because if Retevis is watching, they might want to change this. You can't hold the button down and it won't scroll. So you actually have to physically tap the button each time. And realistically, this is a horrible design. And I say that because if I need to go in the field, I'm trying to program a radio, I don't have a computer handy, and I need to go from 0.6 to an offset of 5 megahertz. I'm going to be tapping that button for days. It's going to take forever. If Retevis is watching this, this is something they might want to change in the next firmware revision, is give us the ability to type in the offset or to hold down the button so that we could scroll a little bit faster. And we're going to set it to 0.6. Okay, so the offset is 0.6, and then we're going to hit function to save the setting. But in order to actually have it so we have a negative or positive offset, we have to find that correct setting so we could tell the radio which way it's got to change its transmitting frequency from the receive frequency. Here, there's an option. It's option 26, and it says SD, and you can go plus, minus, or off. You would have off if this was a simplex frequency. Minus you typically see on VHF, and then plus you typically see on UHF. So I'm going to set this to minus, and then I'm going to hit function to save that. And as of right now, I'm going to go ahead and we need to set the next thing, which is going to be the uplink tone and the downlink tone, or the receive and transmit CTCSS, as most people would probably recognize it. You're going to see I'm back out on the main display, and that's because if you're sitting idle in the menu too long, the radio automatically puts you back out to that main display. Let's go back into the menu, and one more thing I should mention, the SD means shift direction. So when it's about to shift your frequencies for transmitting versus receiving, it needs to know whether it's going to shift them up, down, or if it's going to be simplex. And so you could easily go and you could change those, but most radios call it offset. So I just wanted to make that aware. But if you go ahead now from the shift direction and you hit the down arrow, you have your transmit coding and your receive coding. And then you have transmit and receive coding. And if you hit function, you could actually change it to digital code squelch by hitting the star key, or you could hit it to your standard CTCSS tones by, again, hitting the star key. And right now, the standard ones are off. We're going to change this to 107.2. Again, having to hit the button every time you want to find 107.2. And after we have that set, go ahead and hit function, and we'll continue on now. You'll see it changed the receive and the transmit, because that's what this option does. It changes them both, so you don't have to go through both options to do so. If you didn't know what the tone was, you could actually go to option 29, and you could scan the tones. So you could hit the function button, and then it would scan to find out what the tone is. Now, in order to use this, you have to actually have somebody talking on the frequency, so keep that in mind. This is possibly a great option for somebody who is just traveling. They hear some radio traffic, but they don't know anything about the repeater. This will help them figure out, okay, that's the tone. If you do change that option, though, or you have it seeking, be advised that it'll probably change your settings in the receive and the tone. You see that right there. So we need to change that back to 107.2 again. And we'll continue on. We have the offset. We have the tones. So the only thing I think left to do here is going to be to save this channel. And what we're going to do is, now that we have all the information in and we're selected on 145.330, and if you're not, just hit the A or B button. But since we're selected on 145.330, hold down the function key. And as you'll see now, the number 4 is flashing. So let's program this into section 5. And then we're going to hit the function key again, and it goes back to VFO. But now if we change over to memory mode and we find channel 5, it didn't save. Well, what's the deal? Let me show you. Again, we're going to go into VFO mode here, and we're going to hold this down, and we're going to find channel 5. But then what we need to really do is we need to hit pound. Now when we go over to here, you'll see channel 5 shows 145.330. We're probably going to want to change that name though. Some people like to have channel names, and what you got to do is with it selected, hit the function key. And actually a whole new option opens up then. If you go to option 37, you'll see that there's a display name option now and it's blank. And this is going to be kind of an issue. If you hit function, it brings you down to the area and you'll see a flashing cursor. In typical radios, you'd be able to hit 2, for example, and it'd be A, or you'd hit 2 twice and it'd be B, and so forth. But you can't do that with this radio, so you have to hit up or down arrows here. And so, for example, if you wanted to do a capital N, you can't just hold down again. You got to go all the way up to N. And so this becomes kind of a nuisance, if you will. And so hopefully Retevis will fix this in future firmware releases. But for example, here's N. You see how long it's taken me to get to N? There we go. And then I'm going to hit star. And it'll bring me to the next spot where I can type in a letter. Again, I can't just hit 9. I got to hit the up arrow. And we got to continue hitting the up arrow until we find 9. I think you get the point. I'm going to go ahead now, though, and save it. And I'm going to save it by, well, first I'm going to hit star, and then I'm going to hit function. And the reason I hit star was just to bring it over a cursor. I don't think it really matters, but and then you'll see display name is set to N9. But if I go back out to the main screen, you'll still see it says 145.330. So what's the deal? If you hit function and you go down to option 33, it says display mode, and it's set to frequency for this channel. So let's change that display mode to MR, which is going to be the option here to show whatever the channel name is. So that is how you program a channel in. And I did mention that in my first episode, or excuse me, my second episode, that I had programmed some things wrong in here. Let's talk about those things that I programmed wrong so we could intentionally change them. Really, it comes down to if you programmed it wrong in the radio with the software, you're probably just going to have to redo the whole frequency or the whole memory channel over. Because if I go into memory mode here, you'll see I'm on the N9 HEP VHF. And if I hit function, for example, and then I go to, let's just use this for an option. So the transmit and receive tone. If I hit page down and I hit star twice, I could technically turn it off. Now, you would think that me being able to hit function would save it, but it automatically reverts it back. And I found this behavior on multiple things. So, for example, the step, I can't do anything because I'm in memory mode. And that makes sense, I guess, because would you really need a step in memory mode? If I hit function again, though, and I go to, let's call it the offset or the shift, and I try to change that, that saves. So there's some things in here that'll save and some things that won't. My best suggestion to you, though, is if you need to change something like the tones or something along those lines, you're probably going to want to actually go back into the software and change them or reprogram that frequency the way I just taught you. You could change the channel name. So if you were to go here and then you were to go to option 37, here's the display name, and I could easily go down and I could change this here to, for example, M9 HEP, and then I could save it. And then if I go back out here, now you'll see it saved as M9 HEP. But there are things like the tones that just don't save. But that might be fixed in a future firmware update. And that's the really nice thing about this radio is TYT and Retevis, they're sitting here and they're putting out actual firmware updates. It's not like, hey, we made the radio, this is what you get. There are issues and they'll fix them as they go along. So that was kind of an overview on how you might program this radio. The sun is coming up, which means I've been at it for quite a few hours. And to summarize, we talked about some of the features of this radio while we also programmed this radio manually. we got a better feel overall for how this radio does function and found a couple of flaws with it, but we also found a lot of cool stuff with it. In the next episode, I'll be taking this radio and I'm going to be doing an overall impression and review of the radio, but I'm going to be comparing it to the UV5R from Baofeng. And that's because that's exactly what this radio was a competitor for UV5R, an entry-level radio. So with it, a few tests will be done, and we'll talk about a couple things, and that'll wrap up the series on the RT85. If you like this video or you have any questions, leave me a comment below. And really, if you do like this video, let Retevis know that you liked what I provided. So in the future, when they have new products and everything, maybe they'll send me the product for review, demonstration, and documentation, just like this series I did. Until next time, I'm Ham Radio Dude 73.